Okay, everybody, before we get going on the show today, we have some really exciting news to share with you. Andrea, do you want to break the news?
We're coming up on our 100th episode, and we're going to do a live recording.
It's going to be on Zoom on Thursday, September 4th, 9 a.m. Pacific time. Dr. Cooper, we also have some big news about the website.
We do. We finally have our fatsciencepodcast.com website up and running, and actually that's where you can go to sign up for this event.
Okay, so go to the website, click on 100th episode, the little button at the top, fill out the form, and you're going to have a chance to ask Dr. Cooper that question live on Zoom to celebrate this amazing milestone. And it wouldn't happen, it couldn't happen without all of you listening from all over the world. All right, let's get to the show.
Improving your sleep, that's huge for cortisol. But again, it's like looking at how you run your life, and is there something obvious there that you could do just intentionally to like take the load off? Because remember that term, overreaching. That means you're doing too much for what your body can adapt to. And so you don't want to keep doing that, because then you're going to go into that, potentially that collapse mode where you're going to be just in this chronic fatigue, which you can recover from that, but it takes a long time.
Welcome to Fat Science. I'm Mark Wright, along with Andrea Taylor and Dr. Emily Cooper. It's always good to see you two.
Hi there.
Hi.
All right, on the show this week, how to fight stress in ways other than purchasing new shoes.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm calling out my friend Andrea because
Shoes and cosmetic
Andrea's
products.
stress response is to buy shoes, but that does have a calming effect on you.
Mm-hmm. I return a lot of them, and cosmetic products. I have a lot of facial products and shirts. This week was shoes.
So the Amazon delivery driver can always tell when Andrea is feeling a little bit stressed by the number of boxes that pile up outside your door.
Aww.
You know, we're joking about this, but
It's sad.
it's kind of a serious topic because stress is something that we all deal with. And what I'm interested in talking about that kind of excites me, Dr. Cooper, is that we've always defined stress as something that's bad, that if we have stress in our day, it's somehow a bad day, and we need to do whatever we can to get rid of the things that are causing us stress in our lives. But when we look at the biological reason for our stress response, and we're talking specifically about cortisol today, which is our stress hormone, which I don't know much about it, which it's going to be fun to learn about that. But let's just set the baseline, Dr. Cooper. What is stress? What is cortisol?
Well, stress really is any type of stimulus on the system that requires our body systems to be activated and to do some level of work of some type. So it's it could be something emotional, it could be something physical, it could be nutritional, it could be related to so many different things, exercise. So a lot of people think of things that they do that might seem relaxing, but even those could be stressors because they may require the body to do some extra work to adapt to that. So these physiologic stressors are just around us all the time. And some of them we create ourselves, and some of them are just kind of come with the territory. So, and some can be unpredictable. And I think the key with these is how do we modulate the stressors so where we can make a difference? What could we do so that we're more purposeful with the level of stress that's coming in and the type of stress coming in? And there are some aspects of medicine where we want to use those stressors to train the body to adapt in certain ways too, almost like a dose response. So it's not all bad, actually. It's just kind of how we funnel it into our system in a way that it's not overwhelming. Yeah. And cortisol is one of the hormones that our body produces in response to stress.
Wow. So we think back to our biology, physiology classes, fight or flight. You know, back in the old days, if there was a threat, your body would release a big dose of cortisol And is that related to adrenaline as well? And that would provide our flight response or fight?
Yeah, there's a whole constellation of these chemicals that get released during stressful situations, and they respond to different types of stressors sometimes. Cortisol is pretty sensitive, so it definitely releases with stress, and it is part of that fight or flight response. And so when we're hit with something, our cortisol can immediately just start increasing. And the purpose of that is to mobilize energy. So the cortisol enables our body to access fuel stores easier and more immediately. And it also has kind of a short-term immediate effect on our immune system to help boost our immunity just temporarily, and enable our heart to go faster, our heart rate to go faster, so that if we're exercising or we have to run or something like that, we have the energy to do that. And along with the cortisol, in many situations, you get the adrenaline and you get epinephrine, and these are called catecholamines. And so it's like a little chemical soup that just is like you plug.
It's like you just drank a big can of energy drink.
Exactly.
What's on the menu today?
Exactly.
Chemical soup.
Yeah.
So you're saying that cortisol actually causes your body to release glucose into the bloodstream?
Yeah, it does.
Oh, wow.
It does. And it enables us to access all kinds of fuel stores much more quickly, rapidly. And that's just because our primitive being, a lot of times under these stressful situations, it required us to start running away from a predator or something like that. So we had to mobilize that energy. And
I'm guessing that would have to be quick.
yeah.
It's not like get back to me in 10 minutes and you'll have more glucose in your bloodstream.
No, yeah, it's just like immediate. And it's kind of fun because when you look at some of these stress responders, some of them, not necessarily cortisol, some of them, even when athletes are at a starting line for a competition, before the race even starts, those are activating, which it makes them kind of feel kind of nervous because they do produce symptoms of rapid heart rate and jitteriness and stuff like that. But they're already mobilizing fuel in order to hit that starting line really fast. And so we're really designed to respond in the moment to these stressors.
So those are times when stress and cortisol is good.
Yeah. I mean, if we didn't have it, it could be really dangerous, because what if we are in a stressful situation? I mean, that's not likely. Well, we're not likely now to be chased by predators, but
no, but alligator coming out of like if you're playing golf or something and the alligator's coming out of the thing, you need to be a little aware.
Well, I mean, even something like if you're injured.
I've seen that happen.
I mean, in a more common setting.
Get out of there.
If you're injured, if you were in a car accident, if you fractured your leg, if you
deal with it.
Fell. I mean, if we don't have the stress response, our outcome is not as good. I mean, physiologically.
I didn't realize that's the same.
Yeah.
That's the same
I
thing.
mean, you can die because of an inadequate stress response, because your body doesn't mobilize the energy, your body doesn't help correct. Like say you were in a situation where you were in physiologic shock. That means your blood pressure dropping for various reasons. Well, in that setting, you need lots of cortisol and all these stress hormones to speed up your heart rate, to keep your blood pumping. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't survive. So it can get to be that much, but of course it's a spectrum, so we're not tapping into that degree of the stress hormones on a daily life, situation, but we do tap into them every single day to deal with just our routine lives.
Yeah, and it just makes me think, Dr. Cooper, of when the stakes are really raised in our lives. Like I've walked out on a stage with 20,000 people in an audience to moderate a panel, and leading up to that, you get some nerves and a little jittery, but you also get energized. and you rise to the occasion when the stakes are high because of that
Yeah.
physiologic response. But when continued levels of cortisone are elevated and we're stressed all the time, this can really backfire, right?
It can, and the way you described it, you rise to the occasion. In medical terms, it's called stress adaptation. So we have, you can have really good stress adaptation, or you can have impaired stress adaptation. And so when we're in a situation where we've got a lot of stress going on chronically, that's where we start to get into trouble, because these intermittent stressors that we can adapt to, and when I say adapt, it means our cortisol can go up, that mobilizes whatever energy we need, then the stress is relieved and it settles back down to a baseline. And we go through these cycles of that all the time. That's healthy. But if we're in a situation where the stressors are constantly applied, then all of a sudden this emergency system becomes kind of like just the routine baseline, that it's like a new baseline where we're never recovering from it. And so at that point, the level of exposure to these stress hormones and chemicals is dangerous. And it's physiologically and physically dangerous. And I'm sure it's mentally and emotionally dangerous too, because it does make us feel more amped up. But it can interrupt our sleep. And so once we're not getting enough sleep, that increases the stress hormones even more. And so then you're in a vicious cycle. It can really put strain on our cardiovascular system. So that's why chronically elevated cortisol levels are associated with increased risk of what's called MACE, major adverse cardiovascular events. So that means irregular heart rhythms, strokes, heart attacks. So that's dangerous. And chronic exposure is also linked even to just our own cortisone or cortisol, which is like cortisone when you take cortisone as a medicine. But chronic exposure to even our own cortisol can lead to bone density deficiencies like osteopenia, osteoporosis, increased body fat accumulation, high glucose levels, diabetes, insulin resistance. I mean, we're talking about an array of medical issues and suppressed immunity. So if you think about taking steroids, our cortisol is a glucocorticoid. So it is a steroid. And when we take steroids, and we don't mean anabolic steroids that make you build muscle, but when you take steroids that are for like reducing inflammation and things like that, prednisone, cortisone shots, all of that, that's the same thing basically as our cortisol. So after a while, too much exposure to even taking steroids as a medicine can lead to diabetes and bone density loss and things like that. But our own cortisol, chronic exposure, can do the same kind of thing. And so it's so important to learn in our lives how to regulate that stress response, or how to regulate the incoming stressors where we can, so that we preserve a normal stress response. Because if we don't, you can get into a lot of trouble.
I know that like the high levels of cortisol can really do a number on like blood sugar, on like it can lead to gaining weight. It can also lead to diabetes. But like, how does that happen?
Well, it actually, because it's a hormone, it affects other hormonal systems in our body. And
Right.
so
What's the connection?
the connection is really how it impairs our ability of our pancreas to respond to glucose levels. And so that involves two different hormones that it can affect. One is insulin, which we're familiar with. And so typically when our glucose rises, our pancreas needs to put out more insulin in order to help that glucose get into our tissues to use for energy. But high levels of cortisol impair the pancreatic ability to respond with the insulin production, and so the glucose levels can rise. And the other thing that can happen is glucagon, which is a hormone that elevates when our glucose is low. When the cortisol is high, it also can impair the glucagon function so that our glucagon goes up even when our glucose is not low. And so that makes our glucose go even higher. So that's why it's associated with really increasing the risk of diabetes. And that would be, again, our own excess cortisol production. That's this chronic exposure, not just normal fluctuations that we have throughout the day. But, and similarly, it affects our fat storage and our body's ability to respond to insulin. And so because it impairs our tissue ability to respond to insulin, like our muscles' ability to respond to insulin and take up fuel, that fuel ends up storing in the body fat more, and it impairs our ability to access the body fat stores too. So it leads to higher body weight. It also affects ghrelin levels, which also impair our metabolic function. You're familiar with that. So it does so many things to disrupt our metabolism, both directly and indirectly. Because if you think about it, if your cortisol is super high and amped up at night when you're trying to go to bed, you can't fall asleep. And so then that impaired sleep is going to feed back and further damage your metabolism function. And so that would be more of an indirect way that it's affecting it. So it's just like a snowball effect, really.
Wow. So if it impairs the body's ability to deal with blood sugar, so if you have, that's why doctors always want to know what your blood sugar levels are. If your blood sugar stays high for a long time, Dr. Cooper, and cortisol is behind that, what's the solution there? Because that can lead to what? Insulin resistance. It can really impair the pancreas. It can kind of mess up the whole thing.
It really can. And that's why in the diagnosis of diabetes, when someone comes in with diabetes, one thing that doctors look at is cortisol to see if it's elevated, because some cases the cortisol will be elevated due to a medical problem that is not stress related. It can be due to something called Cushing syndrome or Cushing disease. And we had a guest on a while back who had that we talked about that condition. But that's a condition where the body is manufacturing cortisol inappropriately, just irrespective of stress. And it has to do with a nodule maybe on the adrenal gland that's secreting it by itself, or in the pituitary gland that's telling the adrenal gland to secrete the cortisol. So there are medical conditions associated with high cortisol that need to be ruled out if you have high cortisol. But I'll tell you, the vast majority, it's really stress that's causing it. And as we think about that stress, it's important to rule out also sleep apnea, because sleep apnea creates a real stressor through the night, and that could raise the cortisol levels too. So that could be a cause of the high cortisol. So, but it's hard, because once you identify, yep, your cortisol's high and that's contributing to your diabetes risk, then what do you do about it? Because if it's stress related, that requires a lot of lifestyle change.
And sometimes the stress, it's sort of like a which came first, I think, sometimes, because like the sleep apnea, well, what's causing that? And is that the stress? And then is that I just think sometimes it's a snowball thing, because, I mean, there's so many things going on in the world right now that are causing stress that you can't really control, and that it's not totally lifestyle. I mean, you can't change the world right now, totally.
No.
I mean,
well, that's the thing. When we talk about lifestyle, you kind of do have to put these buckets out there. And I had a program many years ago for people that had chronic fatigue syndrome, and they couldn't do anything because they were so fatigued. And I started to get into this because I was getting referrals from other doctors to try to kind of help rehabilitate people like that with exercise programs. And as I started looking at it, you really see how it's such a hormonal issue, that chronic fatigue, and it has so much to do with our cortisol and our stress adaptation. Because what we didn't talk about is what happens if you have that chronic stress day after day after day after day, and it doesn't resolve. Well, eventually you just stop adapting to the stress, because that's an emergency system. and now you've overused it, you're overusing it. So it's become something that is sort of not viewed as an emergency system anymore.
Right, that's the normal.
Right, that's a normal, exactly. And so then if a stressor is applied, instead of mounting a cortisol response to help you deal with it, this whole system kind of collapses. And it's called hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction.
Whoa.
Yeah, and another term would be stress adaptation syndrome or something called general adaptation syndrome. Another nickname for it is overtraining syndrome that's been applied when people are athletes. But it's all the same thing. It's all that these stressors have been applied without proper recovery. So it's just a chronic stimulus of stress. And finally, the system just kind of like just stops responding. So then you end up where your cortisol levels are too low. So it goes through a phase where they're too high. That's actually termed overreaching. And I think that's a good term because it means you're overreaching. You're in your life, you're trying to do more than you're capable of, whether it's voluntary or involuntary. Things are coming at you. Some of them maybe you have no control over, but maybe some of them you do. Maybe you're saying yes to everything. In my brain, I'm going, yeah, that's you. As I'm saying this, I'm like, are you listening to?
Are you listening to what you're saying?
Yeah, because I mean, learning to say no to some things and learning, especially if you are like a can-do person, you'll take on more. If you want to help people, you do more. But at times we have to set boundaries. We have to be able to know our limits, and we have to preserve our ability to recover. And so if you don't, you can kind of tip over an edge. So when people are in that, where it's called overreaching, where they're in the high cortisol state a lot, they'll notice symptoms like can't sleep, kind of anxious, but feel like super tired all day, like amped up at night, tired during the day, just kind of like overstimulated feeling, anxious, that kind of thing. And just burnt out feeling. But then once it tips over into that, adaptation failure kind of situation, those same people feel like suddenly they have no energy. I mean, they cannot do anything. And it's every time they try to exercise, they will feel more exhausted. Every time a stressor is applied, they want to go to sleep. So it's the opposite. Where instead of mobilizing fuel, your system's collapsing under the burden of the stress. And so that takes a lot longer to recover from something like that. So that's why it's important to pay attention to how you feel when stress is applied. And if you're like, oh, that stress was applied and I, like what Mark was describing, I rose to the occasion and I did my job. I did a good job. And afterwards I relaxed and I felt great and I felt good the next day. Like, you didn't pay a price for it. That means your system's working. But otherwise you have to be really careful.
So I want to get to some of the solutions for solving chronic stress, but I was intrigued by something you sent over, Dr. Cooper, that talked about the connection between cortisol and testosterone.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like a teeter-totter. What is the connection between these two hormones? How do they work together?
Well, and this has been known in sports science for many, many years because, athletes and sports physiologists have looked at this because it affects athlete performance quite a bit, male athlete performance, these ratios between cortisol and testosterone. But it's kind of a sign of recovery from stressors. If you look at, there should be a balance there. So if the cortisol is really high, in that setting, it means there's quite a bit of stress. And testosterone is also a stress hormone, but testosterone goes down when there's stress. So the testosterone going down and the cortisol going up is very common in males. And that's fine. Again, it's okay if that happens intermittently. In fact, it will happen when you're going to do something stressful. That's just going to happen. But then coming out of that, they both rebound to where they should be. And in fact, the stimulation of the stressor puts your body into a state of what's called supercompensation, which means like you said, Mark, it rises to the occasion. So it strengthens our system to prepare it for a future stressor that might be similar. So having gone through the stress, it strains it in the moment. Then as we recover, that's why recovery is so important. It's in the recovery period that our body rises to the occasion to do this super compensation, to kind of assimilate that information, to make it stronger to deal with that stress if it comes again. So it's not a problem that the cortisol and testosterone do this in males, but it is a problem if the cortisol ends up chronically elevated, then the testosterone ends up chronically suppressed. And part of it is that our cortisol feeds back to our brain. Hopefully this doesn't get too boring, but it feeds back to the brain. And I don't know if you remember, we talked about the melanocortin pathway in the brain that regulates our metabolism and our neuroendocrine system. And so when the cortisol feeds back to our brain tries to suppress our cortisol by lowering a hormone from it's called the POMC portion, POMC, of the melanocortin pathway. That hormone's called ACTH. So the incoming is the cortisol. That tells our POMC pathway to produce less ACTH, because ACTH is adrenocorticotropic hormone, meaning when it's released, it tells your adrenal gland to make more cortisol. So it's trying to interrupt the cycle by suppressing that ACTH. But at the pituitary gland, it also suppresses LH. LH is luteinizing hormone, which is what kind of, in large part, determines men's testosterone levels. So that's kind of more of there's some biochemistry. There's more biochemistry that affects the testosterone because of the high cortisol, but it's kind of a little bit tweaky to get into that. But I think that overall what I'm trying to say is that this feedback loop that we talk about for metabolism, we always say how it affects our reproductive hormones, it affects all the other hormone systems. Well, cortisol is an input signal that also impairs that metabolic feedback loop. So everything downstream, the testosterone is going to be affected. In women, their reproductive hormones are affected too by high cortisol. So, but in men, you see a lot of like body fat increase and lean mass loss because of that imbalance of cortisol and testosterone when there's a lot of stress.
Okay. Now let's talk about solutions. Are we all going to meditate? Are we all going to do yoga? Are we all going to do go out in the woods for a walk? What are we doing?
I know. I think, it's individual. You've got to figure out what works for you. I know I've been trying to tell myself I need to do something, and I keep telling myself, but I haven't been
when
doing
have we done it? Have we done it? I did a lot of I've done a bunch of facials. They seem to have worked. I did a lovely one the other night.
It works for you.
Yeah, I don't know. It worked for a day.
I'm a big believer in taking really those micro moments through the day. It's great to set aside time to actually do something specifically for this. But I think sometimes that's not enough because it's so isolated from your day. And so, but I do think it's very individual. But I think taking little micro moments throughout the day to just take some extra breaths, to close your eyes or to go sit outside in the sun for a second, for a few minutes, something just to get away from those oncoming stressors, just really small ones. It can make an impact, but definitely what science has shown is there is benefit to meditation, can definitely affect our cortisol levels. In fact,
and this has been proven scientifically, correct?
Yes, there's numerous studies showing, but it's most of them have been done with transcendental meditate, really classic meditation strategies and practices, and the cortisol levels definitely can reduce dramatically with that. In fact, if you're somebody who's in that stress adaptation failure mode, it might not be good to do the meditation, honestly, because you're already so sluggish and a responder that in that case, you might need something more stimulating. But meditation has been shown to reduce elevated cortisol levels. Massage therapy has been shown to reduce elevated cortisol levels. Tai Chi and also Hatha yoga and Iyengar yoga, those kind of yoga that's more holding poses, breathing, the gentle type of yoga that doesn't have a lot of, cardiovascular aspect to it. Those have all been shown scientifically in research studies to reduce, elevated cortisol levels. So I think it's great if you can incorporate something like that into your life. But I think things that make you feel less stressed are good to some degree, because it's true that everybody's an individual and people respond differently. Some studies I saw show that males and females respond differently to music as a de-stressor, where I can't remember now which group it was more of a stimulator, but it's not the same. And so some people feel more relaxed when they listen to music, and some people feel more stimulated. So that you have to watch out for that. But I hear a lot of people say, when I exercise, I'm less stressed. That I would worry about, because remember, exercise is a stressor. So if your cortisol's high and you go and you just go out and train hard, you're going to elevate your cortisol more. But going for a gentle walk, getting out in nature, like Andrea said, that also I think has been shown to reduce the stress hormones. So little, just gentle exercise, stretching, things like that. But then if you're an active athletic person, looking at what you could do to support your life and your activities more could make a big difference too. So if you're not fueling your exercise well, just doing that will reduce your cortisol from where your baseline is, just adding appropriate fueling. So that means pre-workout, during workouts if you're doing long workouts, getting those carbs in, and post-workout fueling. Adding those three things to somebody who's a very athletic person, that will really help stabilize the cortisol. Improving your sleep, that's huge for cortisol. But again, it's like looking at how you run your life, and is there something obvious there that you could do just intentionally to take the load off? Because remember that term, overreaching. That means you're doing too much for what your body can adapt to. And so you don't want to keep doing that, because then you're going to go into that, potentially that collapse mode, where you're going to be just in this chronic fatigue, which, you can recover from that, but it takes a long time.
Wow. So in the notes that you sent, Dr. Cooper, it suggests that when your blood sugar gets too low, you're more susceptible for cortisol to kick in, because that raises the blood sugar level. So eating carbs in the morning,
yes,
gets your blood sugar up and makes you more secure that way.
Yeah,
is that fair to
thanks
say?
for bringing that up. That's a huge problem. Is low carb status and low glucose levels can definitely strain the cortisol system. And as you said, it makes logical sense, because cortisol enables our glucose to go up more. And so to adapt to that setting of insufficient fueling or low blood sugar reactions, our cortisol is going to go up to try to correct it. And so that could establish a really vicious cycle that can push people into prediabetes eventually. So having breakfast in the morning with complex carbs involved, fueling the workouts with carbs is really important. And just getting enough of these complex carbs throughout the day in your meals and snacks is very important.
So what can we do in terms of what we eat? Like you're saying, eat breakfast would be a good way to start the day, to start your day sort of with less stress involved. But what else should we do? I mean, are there any stress buster foods that would be good? I mean, I know obviously you're not a dietitian, but is there anything that would be really, really positive?
There's nothing like that's right for everyone, just to
Right,
say.
obviously, yeah.
But they have done some, looks at things that are like high in antioxidants
Yeah.
and
Oh.
omega-3 oils, and also things that improve our microbiome health.
Oh,
Because
those gut foods.
the more
Yeah.
we're learning about the microbiome, it's just mind blowing how it really affects our entire health, including our kind of neurologic and emotional health, and our ability to just keep all of our hormones in optimal balance. So I think that's why I think some of these foods that are recommended, they're focusing on enhancing the microbiome. So that's going to be a lot of fruits, veggies, and just whole grains, complex carbs, things like that, and fermented foods and stuff. It's not like a miracle, honestly, to reduce your cortisol, but it's just taking care of yourself, basically. It's part of taking care of yourself so that you have the defenses against, this stress adaptation syndromes that can occur. But I mean, I think foods are just part of our overall health plan. I don't think that they are as powerful as more looking at our life and our lifestyle. I don't think they can compensate for a lifestyle that's just headed for disaster. And I had a day yesterday in my clinic where I couldn't believe the degree of trauma and stress and tragedies that some of my patients are going through. And it's not, these are things that were just unexpected, unpredictable. And so on top of those, then they have their daily stressors that were there before these unexpected things occur. And they are trying to make it work for their family and things. And then they have health issues on top of that. And so I'm just thinking, wow, this is like really unbelievable. and how do you deal with all that? And so I kind of feel like it goes back to just taking care of ourselves, like the basic nutrition that we recommend for improving our metabolic function. That is what will help keep our stress response in line, and fueling our exercise, getting our sleep, taking care of our health risk factors, like if you're glucose or if you have hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, what are your disease risk factors, and getting those under control. But beyond that, I think the most important thing really is looking at areas in our lives that we can control and trying to figure out how do we start improving that balance, because the degree of things coming at people right now that are unpredictable just seem to be ramping up. And you just never know what's going to happen there. So I think just having a lifestyle that really prioritizes that balance is probably the key, most important thing when it comes to the stress adaptation. And then, eating your antioxidant rich foods and olive oil and omega-3s and all of that comes into play, where that will just further enhance it.
I love how you say, just take control of what you can. I was having a discussion with one of my neighbors. We solve all the world's problems every couple of weeks when he's out for his walk and stops by. But we both discovered during a discussion last night that we both have unplugged from the daily news cycle because we were just getting upset every day. And the other day, my mother, I was talking with her on the phone, and she said, "Oh my gosh, did you hear about such and such?" I'm like, "No, I didn't. No." Because I choose where and when to consume news.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think we need to just do that in all of our areas of our lives. And then the other thing, Dr. Cooper, that you've taught me to pay attention to is just to really pay attention to kind of what our baseline default mode is. And on the days when I feel stressed and frantic and crabby, and it's like, oh, that's because you cut short your sleep last night. You stayed up and watched too many episodes of Ray Donovan.
Oh, God.
And which I've already seen the whole thing, but that's a separate story. But paying attention to what's our default, what can we control, and we do have agency over what we expose ourselves to. We do have agency over getting out of the house and walking
Yeah.
and unplugging and being good to ourselves and taking probiotics and having good healthy foods and spending time with yoga or meditation and stuff like that. Life is a choice.
Yeah.
And we can check out and say, oh, it's out of my hands. Well, some stuff is out of our hands, but a lot of it isn't. And we can control.
It's true. And your life has changed a lot, Mark, because you were in a group where it's higher risk for cortisol problems because of your night shift, kind of awkward night shift work that you did. And, having that type of a job, moving on.
I'll tell you, when your alarm clock goes off loudly at 3 a.m, there is an immediate burst of cortisol and adrenaline. You know how when you get just scared out of a sleep?
Yes.
Like that happened every day.
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
It's time to get up.
And that's why they do say that these, certain occupations are at higher risk, like the night
It's called
shift.
an alarm clock.
Yeah. Alarm.
Alarm.
That's right. But that's why, they do say that you're at higher risk in those occupations for not just like high cortisol, but for the damage that the high cortisol can do, which is the cardiovascular disease risk, the diabetes risk, the obesity risk, So we have to think about cortisol. It's not just stress, it's also our health. And it could actually lead us down a path of, really dangerous disease risks. And so I think you're right. It's just making that choice in your life to try to put more balance in there. Even though we do that, you kind of need to look back intermittently to see if it was enough because of those, crazy, unpredictable stressors that come at us that we didn't count on. And so we've got to keep modifying things. But, some people don't have the ability to. That's the other thing. Some people have done, they don't have the luxury of finding any areas where they can reduce that stress because
Right, and then you stress about that.
yeah, exactly. And so we just need a good system of trying to, through our healthcare system, help patients evaluate their stress setting. And I feel like we need to elevate the whole stress thing into the medical conversation way more than it is. Myself included with my own patients, need to elevate it and make it, but it always feels so kind of hopeless. Like, what are we going to do? But again, as you said, yoga, meditation, breathing,
Or whatever's
exercises,
right. Yeah,
go to
whatever's
sleep
right.
earlier.
Sleep isn't sleep just like a miracle tool? If I get a good night's sleep, it just makes all the difference.
Such
the
a
next day.
difference.
Yeah.
It's so essential. And, and that chronic sleep deprivation just is a really bad cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we started out the episode joking about Andrea's
This week's shoe problem.
purchases.
Yeah.
But
Last-
Andrea, what
right.
you always strike me as being upbeat, happy. It seems like you make that a life choice. As we close out the episode, how do you deal with stress these days?
I do make it a choice. I mean, I really do make it a long time ago, I read a bunch of books about Japanese mindsets, and it's because a lot of it is because like the walls are really thin, made out of paper. So in their heads, they may have like compartmentalized minds. And I think of it as like, okay, I know all this crap is happening and it's all horrible. So I just I know it's happening. I deal with it. I think about it. I don't think that, I'm not one of those people who thinks, oh, it's not happening. It doesn't exist. I deal with it and I think about it and I have those conversations, but then I put it in another place in my mind and then I move along and I have my other happy stuff that I deal with. Because if I don't, I will go into a really dark place and I'll think that the world is going to crash and be horrible and evil and disgusting and everyone sucks. So I have that, and then I move into the other place where everything is beautiful, and I deal with the arts, and I deal with theater, and I deal with art and pretty clothes and style, and I put that in a different place, and that's what I deal with for the day.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I'll go insane.
Yeah. Dr. Cooper, any final thoughts before we close out?
No, but this is inspiring me. I'm going to start making my own anti-stress plan.
And I need to get more sleep.
That's
I hear you.
Definitely
I
the first
definitely-
step.
I need to hear Dr. Cooper in my head saying that all those things happen at like 1 in the morning and get,
All the good stuff.
yes,
Yeah.
I really do need to hear
If
that.
you're awake at 1 a.m, nothing good is happening.
Yes, I really,
right.
I mean, it's really important, the sleep thing.
How about how about you, Mark?
Yeah. In terms of what?
What you can do in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I just incremental change. That's what I've been dedicating to, and I've gone are the days of me making these grandiose resolutions because I always fail at those. But just little stuff like get outside and walk. I have a friend who's an artist. His name's Mike Regan, and he started a nonprofit called the Fallen Heroes Project. He sketches soldiers who have been killed and first responders. He sketches them and sends the sketches, the portraits, beautiful portraits to their families as a means to helping them heal. He does 2 of these a day. He gets up at like 4 a.m. He draws for 8 hours a day. So he does his portraits, and around noon when he's done with his second portrait, this is extremely emotionally draining work, he goes for a walk. And I asked him, well, what do you do on the walks? He says, sometimes I cry. Sometimes I just think. But every day he's built into he's been doing this for decades, and he's done tens of thousands of these portraits and sent them for free to these fallen hero, these Gold Star families. But it's proof that if we just pay attention to like what are the stresses in our life, and for Mike, it's just really emotional, intense, work that he does for 8 hours, and then he unplugs and goes for a walk, and it's therapeutic for him.
Oh, yeah.
And it just makes me think that we all just need to kind of pay attention to our lives and figure out what the stresses are. If it's a job you need to quit, then quit.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's a relationship that's
Then quit.
killing you, quit. But if we just pay attention to what we need to do to be good to ourselves, and again, getting back to take control of what you can, because a lot of life is stuff we can't control. But when we do the little stuff on, taking control of what we can, then the beauty happens. I've started doing just going outside in the morning with my coffee on the back patio with the plants and the birds, and I just sit there and have coffee for 15 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Well,
And it
that's its
feels
own
so good.
meditation.
Oh, it feels.
I know.
So
I
good.
love that. That's like my
Oh.
kind of thing too.
Yeah.
I get a lot out of that.
This has been a really interesting conversation because I think stress is a universal, but I think this conversation has helped me see stress in a very different way. There's good and there's bad. It's a balance.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks, you two, for another edition of Fat Science.
No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.